In episode 4 of Dan in his Van, I'm going to talk today about PA systems, how you use them, tips, tricks, bits and pieces. Now, I'm a full-time musician, but I have done live sound in the past, which includes live multi-track recording of bands, and I also consult with small venues about PA systems and what they should install, and then I do the installation myself. So what is PA then? How should we think about it? Well, my answer would be that we have to balance acoustic instruments and electronic ones. As soon as you establish a good working balance between the two main families of sounds that you will get, acoustic ones versus electronic ones, you basically, that's it. You've pretty much got it in the bag. So starting with the very smallest PA systems. Now, if you playing in a hotel foyer or you're doing a restaurant gig, you're going to want something reasonably small that just does a job. Don't forget there's people eating or sitting chatting. You've got to make sure that you give a really good sound at a controlled level. So you might have a mixing desk, for example, with 2 mic inputs and a couple of other inputs where you can plug your backing tracks or your keyboard in or whatever. If you're a guitarist, you'd ideally have your amp there as well, because electric guitar is really a special case in terms of amplification. It has lots of mid-range and that sort of thing, which cannot be really captured by a mixing desk. Now, it's unlikely that you'd get feedback problems. Problems where, what is feedback actually? Well, feedback is where you get a sort of whistling sound from the speaker because the mic is turned up too loud or the mic is pointing at the speaker. Now, the reason for that is that the speaker level will go into the speaker energy. The sound coming out of the speaker will go into the mic, through your mixing desk, back into the speaker, back into the mic, back into the desk, speaker, mic, desk, speaker, mic, desk, speaker, mic. And that is what makes the thing unstable. It oscillates, actually. You get this sort of pitch that comes out of your speaker. And that can be really serious if it's too loud. You can cook a speaker or an amplifier or whatever with that. So usually you won't get any of those problems. Now, moving on to medium-sized PA systems. This is where things can get really tricky because medium-sized PA is often used to amplify a band in a venue that's too big for it. Now, I have a medium-sized PA system, and when I get a gig in, or a wedding gig, well, I'll often ask, where is it? Is it in a marquee? Is it in a, where is it? If it's in a marquee, you're going to need to have extra PA. So you factor that in with your price, or one of the other band members will bring their PA and you can combine forces. That's fine. And the more speakers you have and the more power rating, basically the more stable it will be. Now, talking about stability and what happens when an amplifier is running at its maximum capability or just about to go into distortion, you get a problem in that if you've got a speaker that is moving in and out quite a lot, don't forget that a speaker is a physical thing and it disturbs air. And that's what you hear. You hear the air, the disturbances of the air caused by the speaker or sound source. Now, an amplifier that is controlling a speaker, it will say to the speaker, right, going out, and then you're coming back in. So we have something called a push-pull amplifier. And that is literally, it means what it says. It pushes the speaker out and then pulls it back. And amplifiers, if you buy an amp that's quite good, if you look in the specification, you'll see something called damping factor. And that is a measure of an amplifier's ability to be able to pull a speaker back, or indeed, having pulled it back, to push it back out again. Essentially, it's the amplifier controlling this physical device. And as an amplifier goes into distortion, or it's right at the top of its level, you get problems with the speaker actually beginning to control the amplifier. The speaker's moving in and out and the amp's going, no, wait. It's like trying to getting a child to pull or push a supermarket trolley. The supermarket trolley is going to wander off and you can't hold it. Those are the sort of problems where feedback is very, very, it's on the cards. You can get things like bottoming out of the bass end and that sort of thing. So in these situations with a medium-sized PA system, this is where the tips and tricks bit really comes into play. And I'll cover large PA systems in a minute and PA engineers and how to deal with that situation. With medium-sized PA, essentially you're going to be trying to amplify everything that you've got on stage and putting it through a pair of small speakers, perhaps they're 12-inch drivers or maybe 15, with a tweeter. So it'll handle a certain amount of bass. But bass is where the problems begin, because 80% of the energy in a sound wave is below about 200 hertz. So that's really quite an unbalanced view of sound. So the other 20% is everything above. That is why a bass speaker is bigger than a treble one, is because the bass speaker's got to shift more air. It's dealing with 80% of the energy. So when you are miking everything up on your mixing desk, you've got all your vocals, you've got your brass, and then keyboards through DI boxes, and I'll cover DI boxes in a second. Only amplify the sound in full if it needs the bass. So, for example, a kick drum or a bass guitar. Everything else, you can turn the bass down on each channel on your mixing desk. And actually what you'll find is that most decent mixers have a bass cut control. It's often a line that does this. It's a button with a line that's sort of two angles. Basically what that means is it will cut everything below about 100 hertz maybe. Different desks have different cutoffs. You don't need lots of low bass on vocals. You don't need lots of low bass on overheads, drum overheads. Just take it away. Because if you do amplify the bass on those sort of instruments, you are amplifying just general wallowing bass on the stage, and you're wasting a lot of power. Now, with a small PA system, a bass drum, whose sort of center frequency is really quite lower, much lower than a bass guitar, you're not going to be able to really amplify it effectively. But just try a bit of mid-range instead, because actually middle bass, sort of 150 to sort of 250, is, there's a lot of energy there, and a speaker system will be able to cope with that much better than it will at 40 or 50 hertz. So you could, for example, if you have a graphic equalizer, and you can get these cheap, really cheap, between the mixing desk and your amplifier or speaker system, put a graphic equalizer and just cut everything below about 80. Just don't need it there. It means that you've got more room, more headroom to play with, and the peak lights on your speakers or your power amplifiers won't come on as often. And that's really, really vital in order to get that balance. Don't forget what I was saying just now about balancing acoustic versus electric instruments. Now, this also brings problems with on-stage level, because ideally you want electronic instruments on stage to be kept under control so that the acoustic instruments, which are the ones your PA system is really designed to amplify, you've got to make sure that that stage level is as low as possible without it, just a workable stage level. And a good yardstick is to make sure that you can hear the drums on stage, and then amplifiers that are added don't swamp those drums. That's pretty much it. Guitar amps are really they're a bit of a sort of an enemy of the PA engineer, and this is where we move on to the larger systems in a minute. Now, guitar amps are stacked up with high mid frequencies, and they can really cut through a mix, and it can be quite difficult if the guitarist on stage has got their amp up too high. Difficult, because very often a guitarist will find a sweet spot on their amplifier that makes it sound really, really good. And guitar amps do have to be cranked up a bit to get the most out of them. That's partly the fashion for lower power guitar amps now. It used to be 100 watt amps in the 1970s and 80s when PA systems weren't so good. But now they're so good, PA systems are really efficient and you can get massive power ratings. You get smaller guitar amps, which means you can turn them up without them being too loud acoustically. with acoustic level, you've made the guitar amp distort and flatten out nicely. Now, a PA engineer will very often, and lots of gigs where I've done, and I've been the guitarist as well. So guitarists, I understand I'm not poking a hole in your sort of egos or guitar amp levels or whatever. A PA engineer will often say to me, can we have a little less level on stage? To which my answer is, yeah, sure, volume down. Some guitarists, it's a little bit of a thorny issue, one might say, where they think, oh yeah, but I need to have my lead sound, I need to hear myself. Now, this is where your stage monitoring comes in. It's important to have good monitoring. Now, when I consult on a live music installation in a venue, I always go way over the top with monitoring. Well, when I say way over the top, I mean you need 16 channels going back from your mixer to the stage, because you need to have at least 8 stereo mixes for your in-ear monitoring, which is de rigueur nowadays, or you have 16 wedge monitor returns. It means that every single person in that band is happy. The lead vocalist will often need two monitors because of the fact they're looking around or they're interacting with the crowd. They'll need directional. They'll need essentially a sort of 180 view of their own sound. That's why vocalists often have two. Other instruments, one monitor's fine. You have a monitor next to the drummer, but very quickly, if you're not careful with monitoring, you can end up with a huge on-stage level, which will then feed your mics on stage, which will then feed the monitors, which will then feed the PA, and you have this unstable situation again. Now, this is really, it's just down to the fact that some instruments might be too loud on stage. If you've got a really good on-stage level, your PA system is going to sound really good. It's just it. Because a PA engineer who is worth their salt will say to somebody, can we have that a little bit quieter on stage, please, and then I can feed you some through the monitor. And there are reasons for this. It's not this. There is this sort of political standoff that happens between PA engineers and musicians, and it's a shame. It shouldn't be there, really. There's no reason for it, because actually the PA engineer is an extra member of the band. If you've got really bad sound engineer or somebody who's sort of bears a grudge against the guitarist on stage because they won't turn their amp down, or there's some sort of, or the question is put wrong, can you turn that down, please? Rather than, could we have a little bit less on stage level? It just means I can, the two parties can be sort of equally guilty, let's say. And very often you have a PA engineer who is in fact a musician as well, and you have musicians on stage who do live sound. So as soon as you know a bit about each other's jobs, it can be very useful, but it can also bring with it an awful lot of problems. Just cut it to below 80 hertz, I don't need that through the monitors, thank you. It's just not a healthy relationship. I did a lot of gigs in Japan where the front of house engineer was just, in every venue, was just beyond excellent at their job, really good. And it was so effortless. And sometimes in venues you have another mixing desk off the stage that is just for the monitors. So when you want something in your monitor, you just turn to your left or your right and you see the monitor engineer, and of course you're in close proximity. It's easier to do that. And it's just because the Japanese know how to do live sound. They are really good at it. There's of course the pride in doing their job properly. Things like stage plans do help as well. If you're dealing with a large PA system and you've got an engineer or a stagehand or monitor mix or whatever, you just send them a drawing or PDF, whatever, of your stage mix, and lo and behold, you arrive and then you find everything's set up beautifully for your delectation. And things like that just make a massive difference to before you've even started sound checking the kick drum or the guitar or the bass or whatever. And very often in live venues, you will have a large distance between the stage and the mixing desk. So when you plug everything in, you will be plugging everything into XLR, or for 3-pin Canon type jacks. Now what that means, or sockets actually, what that means is that if you've got a jack, if you've got a computer or a keyboard on stage or an acoustic guitar, it's going to be on a jack plug. You think, well, how am I going to plug this in? That's where the DI box comes in. This is the answer to many, many PA problems. When you have a jack socket, that isn't what's called an unbalanced signal. Now, a microphone is called a balanced signal. Now, balanced and unbalanced, it takes a little bit. I've explained this on another of my videos on my channel. You can see this in the box below. Essentially, you want to send everything as a balanced signal from the stage to your PA. Everything has to be balanced. And then everything that comes back from the mixing desk to the stage, ideally, is also balanced, going down a separate multi-core cable, so that you've minimized the possibility of crosstalk or feedback or anything like that. DI boxes very often have a switch on them that say earth lift. Now that, you get mains ground loops, where you get sort of, you plug something in and you can immediately hear this sort of buzzing or humming. Now that's due to the piece of kit having an earth, as well as the mixing desk having an earth, and then the mains earth as well. Now the dodgy ones will disconnect the mains earth to sort the problem out, which is okay until you die, and then it becomes a bit of an issue. So you should always make sure that everything is grounded on stage. Any grounds that are removed by the DI box ground lift, it just lifts the audio ground instead. That's much safer. So you get mics on stage that also, that obviously they are all balanced. You get dynamic mics and you get condenser mics. Dynamic mics, vocals, or something you stick in front of a guitar amp, they are much, much more directional and than a condenser mic would be. So you've got to be very careful on stage when you're miking something up with a condenser mic, because it's much more sensitive and much, much more prone to feedback. So drum overheads very often are condenser mics, and you might have some on maybe the brass players, for example. So you've got to be very, very careful with lots of mics on stage, because essentially it's, you know, it's this giant feedback problem waiting to happen. Well, there is a bit about PA systems. I hope that helps. Now, if you're on your medium-sized PA system and you do get lots of feedback, you've got to try and filter that out on each channel, but you can also filter it out with things like anti-feedback filters. You know, Behringer and people like that do a lot of anti-feedback things. The X32 mixing desk by Behringer is really good, and that also enables you to control your monitor mix, for example, via an iPad. And monitor mixing is, you know, it's important to get right. You've just got to make sure that the musician is happy on stage and that the PA engineer is happy with what they are hearing, and so the two work together to make that final result the best possible.